My aunt haunts me, her ghost drawn to me because now, after 50 years of neglect, I alone devote pages of paper to her, though not origamied into houses and clothes. I do not think she always means me well. I'm telling on her, and she was a spite suicide, drowning herself in the drinking water. The Chinese are always very frightened of the drowned one, whose weeping ghost, wet hair hanging and skin bloated, waits silently by the water to pull down a substitute. When we Chinese girls listen to the adults talk story, we learn that we failed if we grew up to be but wives or slaves. We could be heroines, swordswomen. Even if she had to rage across all China, a swordswoman got even with anybody who hurt her family. Perhaps women were once so dangerous that they had to have their feet bound. It was a woman who invented white crane boxing only 200 years ago. She was already an expert pole fighter, daughter of a teacher trained at the Shaolin Temple, where there lived an order of fighting monks. She was combing her hair one morning when a white crane alighted outside her window. She teased it with her pole, which it pushed aside with a soft brush of its wing. Amazed, she dashed outside and tried to knock the crane off its perch. It snapped her pole in two. Recognizing the presence of great power, she asked the spirit of the white crane if it would teach her to fight. It answered with a cry that white crane boxers imitate today. Later, the bird returned as an old man, and he guided her boxing for many years. Thus, she gave the world a new martial art.
You're ready for the most exciting game of all.
Oh, boy!
And the playing field for this game is in the mind. Uh-oh. Look at the condition of your mind. Antiquated ideas, bungling, false concepts, superstitions, confusion. To think straight, we'll have to clean house. There, that's more like it. A nice clean sweep. This game is played with circles and triangles. Think of a perfect circle. A perfect circle. Perfect circle. Perfect. Put a triangle inside and turn it. Now spin the circle. And what have you got?
A ball!
Yes, a sphere. The shape of things is first discovered in the mind. Slice off the top, and we have a
magnifying glass.
That's right. A lens is a section of a sphere. All optical instruments are created through mathematics. You see, there's a lot more to mathematics than just numbers and equations. Let's get back to our circle and triangle. Roll it, and we have a
wheel.
The circle has been the basis for many of man's important inventions. The mind can create the most amazing things. If we spin the triangle, we have a
Cone.
slice the cone. The cone is full of useful mathematical shapes. Slice it again. Slice it several times. The orbits of all planets and satellites can be found in the cone. No matter how you slice it, it's always mathematics. A slice like this gives us the reflector of a searchlight. A slice like this, the mirror of a giant telescope. A line on a cone, and we have a drill. and a spring. Now you're ticking.
Number, please.
The mind is the birthplace for all of man's scientific achievements. The mind knows no limits when used properly. Think of a pentagram, Donald. Now put another inside, a third, and a fourth. No pencil is sharp enough to draw as fine as you can think, and no paper large enough to hold your imagination. In fact, it is only in the mind that we can conceive infinity. Mathematical thinking has opened the doors to the exciting adventures of science.
I'll be doggone. I've never seen so many doors before.
Each discovery leads to many others, an endless chain.
What's the matter with these doors? Hey! These doors won't open. They're locked.
Of course they are locked. These are the doors of the future, and the key is...
Mathematics.
right. Mathematics. The boundless treasures of science are locked behind those doors. In time, they will be opened by the curious and inquiring minds of future generations. In the words of Galileo, mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe.
This was one of the tamer, more modern stories, mere introduction. My mother told others that followed swordswomen through woods and palaces for years. Night after night, my mother would talk story until we fell asleep. I couldn't tell where the stories left off and the dreams began, her voice the voice of the heroines in my sleep. And on Sundays from noon to midnight, we went to the movies at the Confucius Church. We saw swordswomen jump over houses from a standstill. They didn't even need a running start. At last, I saw that I too had been in the presence of great power, my mother talking story. The call would come from a bird that flew over our roof. In the brush drawings, it looks like the ideograph for human, 2 black wings. The bird would cross the sun and lift into the mountains, which looked like the ideograph mountain. There, parting the mist briefly that swirled opaque again. I would be a little girl of 7 the day I followed the bird away into the mountains. The brambles would tear off my shoes and the rocks cut my feet and fingers, but I would drink from the river, which I would meet again and again. We would go so high the plants would change, and the river that flows past the village would become a waterfall. At the height where the bird used to disappear, the clouds would gray the world like an ink wash. Even when I got used to that gray, I would only see peaks as if shaded in pencil. Rocks like charcoal rubbings, everything so murky. There would be just 2 black strokes, the bird. Inside the clouds, inside the dragon's breath, I would not know how many hours or days passed. Suddenly, without noise, I would break clear into a yellow, warm world. New trees would lean toward me at mountain angles, but when I looked for the village, it would have vanished under the clouds. The bird, now gold, so close to the sun, would come to rest on the thatch of a hut, which until the bird's 2 feet touched it, was camouflaged as part of the mountainside. The door opened and an old man and an old woman came out carrying bowls of rice and soup and a leafy branch of peaches. "Have you eaten rice today, little girl?" they greeted me. "Yes, I have," I said out of politeness. "Thank you." "No, I haven't," I would have said in real life, mad at the Chinese for lying so much. "I'm starved. Do you have any cookies? I'd like chocolate chip cookies." "We were about to sit down to another meal," the old woman said. "Why don't you eat with us?" They just happened to be bringing 3 rice bowls and 3 pairs of silver chopsticks out to the plank table under the pines. They gave me an egg as if it were my birthday and tea, though they were older than I, but I poured for them. The teapot and the rice pot seemed bottomless, but perhaps not. The old couple ate very little except for peaches. When the mountains and the pines turned into blue oxen, blue dogs, and blue people standing, the old couple asked me to spend the night in the hut. I thought about the long way down in the ghostly dark and decided yes. The inside of the hut seemed as large as the outdoors. Pine needles covered the floor in thick patterns. Someone had carefully arranged the yellow, green, and brown pine needles according to age. When I stepped carelessly and mussed a line, my feet kicked up new blends of earth colors. But the old man and old woman walked so lightly that their feet never stirred the designs by a needle. A rock grew in the middle of the house, and that was their table. The benches were fallen trees. Ferns and shade flowers grew out of one wall, the mountainside itself. The old couple tucked me into a bed just my width. "Breathe evenly, or you'll lose your balance and fall out," said the woman, covering me with a silk bag stuffed with feathers and herbs. "Opera singers who begin their training at age 5 sleep in beds like this." Then the 2 of them went outside, and through the window I could see them pull on a rope looped over a branch. The rope was tied to the roof, and the roof opened up like a basket lid. I would sleep with the moon and the stars. I did not see whether the old people slept, so quickly did I drop off, but they would be there waking me with food in the morning. "Little girl, you have now spent almost a day and a night with us," the old woman said. In the morning light, I could see her earlobes pierced with gold. "Do you think you can bear to stay with us for 15 years? We can train you to become a warrior." "What about my mother and father?" I asked. The old man untied the drinking gourd slung across his back. He lifted the lid by its stem and looked for something in the water. "Ah, there," he said. At first I saw only water so clear it magnified the fibers in the walls of the gourd. On the surface I saw only my own round reflection. The old man encircled the neck of the gourd with his thumb and index finger and gave it a shake. As the water shook, then settled, the colors and lights shimmered into a picture, not reflecting anything I could see around me. There, at the bottom of the gourd, were my mother and father scanning the sky, which was where I was. "It has happened already, then," I could hear my mother say. "I didn't expect it so soon." "You knew from her birth that she would be taken," my father answered. "We'll have to harvest potatoes without her help this year," my mother said, and they turned away toward the fields, straw baskets in their arms. The water shook and became just water again. "Mama, Papa," I called, but they were in the valley and could not hear me.
Let's begin with a game that's played on squares.
Checkers?
No, chess.
Chess?
A mathematical contest between 2 minds. It's a game that has been enjoyed for centuries by kings and commoners. In fact, Lewis Carroll, a famous mathematician with a literary mind, used chess as a setting for his classic tale, Through the Looking Glass. Alice found herself face to face with a none too friendly group of chess pieces.
Good heavens! What's this?
Upon my soul, it appears to be a lost pawn.
I'm no pawn. I'm Donald Duck.
He says he's Donald Duck.
Preposterous.
Or it could be an Alice.
Alice.
No, no, no. It's a lost pawn.
Lost pawn? Stop that pawn!
Ow, Mr. Spirit. Ow, ow, ow. Phew, that was close.
Now you can look at this game from a safer perspective. Chess is a game of calculated strategy, and since the board is geometrical, is over.
That's very interesting. What's next?
Practically all games are played on geometrical areas. The baseball.
What do you want to do? The old man asked. You can go back right now if you like. You can go pull sweet potatoes, or you can stay with us and learn to fight barbarians and bandits. You can avenge your village, said the old woman. You can recapture the harvest the thieves have taken. You can be remembered by the Han people for your dutifulness. I'll stay with you, I said. So the hut became my home, and I found out that the old woman did not arrange the pine needles by hand. She opened the roof. An autumn wind would come up, and the needles fell in braids, brown strands, green strands, yellow strands. The old woman waved her arms in conducting motions. She blew softly with her mouth. I thought, nature certainly works differently on mountains than in valleys. The first thing you have to learn, the old woman told me, is how to be quiet. They left me by streams to watch for animals. If you're noisy, you'll make the deer go without water. When I could kneel all day without my legs cramping and my breathing became even, the squirrels would bury their hoardings at the hem of my shirt and then bend their tails in a celebration dance. At night, the mice and toads looked at me, their eyes quick stars and slow stars. Not once would I see a three-legged toad, though. You need strings of cash to bait them. The two old people led me in exercises that began at dawn and ended at sunset, so that I could watch our shadows grow and shrink and grow again, rooted to the earth. I learned to move my fingers, hands, feet, head, and entire body in circles. I walked, putting heel down first, toes pointed outward 30 to 40 degrees, making the ideograph 8, making the ideograph human. Knees bent, I would swing into the slow, measured square step, the powerful walk into battle. After 5 years, my body became so strong that I could control even the dilations of the pupils inside my irises. I could copy owls and bats, the words for bat and blessing homonyms. After 6 years, the deer let me run beside them. I could jump 20 feet into the air from a standstill, leaping like a monkey over the hut. Every creature has a hiding skill and a fighting skill a warrior can use. When birds alighted on my palm, I could yield my muscles under their feet and give them no base from which to fly away. But I could not fly like the bird that led me here, except in large, free dreams. During the 7th year, I would be 14. The two old people led me blindfolded to the mountains of the White Tigers. They held me by either elbow and shouted into my ears, "Run, run, run!" I ran, and not stepping off a cliff at the edge of my toes or not hitting my forehead against a wall, ran faster. The wind buoyed me up over the roots, the rocks, the little hills. We reached the Tiger Place in no time, a mountain peak 3 feet 3 from the sky. We had to bend over. The old people waved once, slid down the mountain, and disappeared around a tree. The old woman, good with the bow and arrow, took them with her. The old man took the water gourd. I would have to survive bare-handed. Snow lay on the ground, and snow fell in loose gusts. Another way the dragon breathes. I walked in the direction from which we had come, and when I reached the timberline, I collected wood broken from the cherry tree, the peony, and the walnut, which is the tree of life. Fire, the old people had taught me, is stored in trees that grow red flowers or red berries in the spring, or whose leaves turn red in the fall. I took the wood from the protected spots beneath the trees and wrapped it in my scarf to keep dry. I dug where squirrels might have come, stealing 1 or 2 nuts at each place. These I also wrapped in my scarf. It is possible, the old people said, for a human being to live for 50 days on water. I would save the roots and nuts for hard climbs, the places where nothing grew, the emergency should I not find the hut. This time, there would be no bird to follow. The first night, I burned half the wood and slept curled against the mountain. I heard the white tigers prowling on the other side of the fire, but I could not distinguish them from the snow patches. The morning rose perfectly. I hurried along, again collecting wood and edibles. I ate nothing and only drank the snow my fires made run. The first 2 days were gifts, the fasting so easy to do, I so smug in my strength that on the 3rd day, the hardest, I caught myself sitting on the ground, opening the scarf and staring at the nuts and dry roots. Instead of walking steadily on or even eating, I faded into dreams about the meat meals my mother used to cook, my monk's food forgotten. That night, I burned up most of the wood I had collected, unable to sleep for facing my death. If not death here, then death someday. The moon animals that did not hibernate came out to hunt, but I had given up the habits of a carnivore since living with the old people. I would not trap the mice that danced so close, or the owls that plunged just outside the fire. On the 4th and 5th days, my eyesight sharp with hunger, I saw deer and used their trails when our ways coincided. Where the deer nibbled, I gathered the fungus of immortality. At noon on the 10th day, I packed snow, white as rice, into the worn center of a rock pointed out to me by a finger of ice, and around the rock I built a fire. In the warming water I put roots, nuts, and the fungus of immortality. For variety, I ate a quarter of the nuts and roots raw. Oh, green, joyous rush inside my mouth, my head, my stomach, my toes, my soul. The best meal of my life. One day I found that I was striding long distances without hindrance, my bundle light. Food had become so scarce that I was no longer stopping to collect it. I had walked into Deadland. Here even the snow stopped. I did not go back to the richer areas where I could not stay anyway, but resolving to fast until I got halfway to the next woods, I started across the dry rocks. Heavily weighed down by the wood on my back, branches poking maddeningly, I had burned almost all of the fuel not to waste strength lugging it. Somewhere in the Deadland, I lost count of the days. It seemed as if I had been walking forever. Life had never been different from this. An old man and an old woman were help I had only wished for. I was 14 years old and lost from my village. I was walking in circles. Hadn't I been already found by the old people? Or was that yet to come? I wanted my mother and father. The old man and old woman were only a part of this lostness and this hunger. One nightfall, I ate the last of my food but had enough sticks for a good fire. I stared into the flames, which reminded me about helping my mother with the cooking, and made me cry. It was very strange looking through water into fire and seeing my mother again. I nodded, orange and warm. A white rabbit hopped beside me, and for a moment I thought it was a blob of snow that had fallen out of the sky. The rabbit and I studied each other. Rabbits taste like chickens. My mother and father had taught me how to hit rabbits over the head with wine jugs, then skin them cleanly for fur vests. It's a cold night to be an animal, I said. So you want some fire too, do you? Let me put on another branch then. I would not hit it with the branch. I had learned from rabbits to kick backward. Perhaps this one was sick because normally the animals did not like fire. The rabbit seemed alert enough, however, looking at me so acutely, bounding up to the fire. But it did not stop when it got to the edge. It turned its face once toward me, then jumped into the fire. The fire went down for a moment, as if crouching in surprise. Then the flames shot up taller than before. When the fire became calm again, I saw the rabbit had turned into meat, browned just right. I ate it, knowing the rabbit had sacrificed itself for me. It had made me a gift of meat. When you have been walking through trees hour after hour, and I finally reached trees after the deadland, branches cross out everything, no relief whichever way your head turns until your eyes start to invent new sights. Hunger also changes the world. When eating can't be a habit, then neither can seeing. I saw two people made of gold dancing the earth's dances. They turned so perfectly that together they were the axis of the earth's turning. They were light. They were molten, changing gold. Chinese lion dancers, African lion dancers in mid-step. I heard high Javanese bells deepen in mid-ring to Indian bells, Hindu Indian, American Indian. Before my eyes, gold bells shredded into gold tassels that fanned into two royal capes that softened into lion's fur. Manes grew tall into feathers that shone, became light rays. Then the dancers danced the future, a machine future, in clothes that I had never seen before. I am watching the centuries pass in moments because suddenly I understand time, which is spinning and fixed like the North Star. And I understand how working and hoeing are dancing, how peasant clothes are golden, as king's clothes are golden. How one of the dancers is always a man and the other a woman. The man and the woman grow bigger and bigger, so bright, all light. They are tall angels in 2 rows. They have high white wings on their backs. Perhaps there are infinite angels. Perhaps I see 2 angels in their consecutive moments. I cannot bear their brightness and cover my eyes, which hurt from opening so wide without a blink. When I put my hands down to look again, I recognized the old brown man and the old gray woman walking toward me out of the pine forest. It would seem that this small crack in the mystery was opened, not so much by the old people's magic as by hunger. Afterward, whenever I did not eat for long, as during famine or battle, I could stare at ordinary people and see their light and gold. I could see their dance. When I get hungry enough, then killing and falling are dancing too. The old people fed me hot vegetable soup. Then they asked me to talk story about what happened in the mountains of the white tigers. I told them that the white tigers had stalked me through the snow, but that I had fought them off with burning branches, and my great-grandparents had come to lead me safely through the forests. I had met a rabbit that taught me about self-immolation and how to speed up transmigration. One does not have to become worms first, but can change directly into a human being. As in our own humanness, we had just changed bowls of vegetable soup into people too. That made them laugh. "You tell good stories," they said. "Now go to sleep, and tomorrow we will begin your dragon lessons." One more thing I wanted to say. I saw you, and how old you really are. But I was already asleep. It came out only a murmur. I would want to tell them about that last moment of my journey, but it was only one moment out of the weeks that I had been gone, and its telling would keep till morning. Besides, the 2 people must already know. In the next years, when I suddenly came upon them, or when I caught them out of the corners of my eyes, He appeared as a handsome young man, tall with long black hair, and she as a beautiful young woman who ran bare-legged through the trees. In the spring, she dressed like a bride. She wore juniper leaves in her hair and a black embroidered jacket. I learned to shoot accurately because my teachers held the targets. Often, when sighting along an arrow, there to the side, I would glimpse the young man or young woman. But when I looked directly, he or she would be old again. By this time, I had guessed from their manner that the old woman was to the old man a sister or a friend rather than a wife. After I returned from my survival tests, the two old people trained me in dragon ways, which took another 8 years. Copying the tigers, their stalking kill, and their anger had been a wild, bloodthirsty joy. Tigers are easy to find, but I need adult wisdom to know dragons. You have to infer the whole dragon from the parts you can see and touch, the old people would say. Unlike tigers, dragons are so immense, I would never see one in its entirety. But I could explore the mountains, which are the tops of its head. These mountains are also like the tops of other dragon heads, the old people would tell me. When climbing the slopes, I could understand that I was a bug riding on a dragon's forehead as it roams through space, its speed so different from my speed that I feel the dragon solid and immobile. In quarries, I could see its strata, the dragon's veins and muscles, the minerals, its teeth and bones. I could touch the stones the old woman wore, its bone marrow. I had worked the soil, which is its flesh, and harvested the plants and climbed the trees, which are its hairs. I could listen to its voice in the thunder and feel its breathing in the winds, see its breathing in the clouds. Its tongue is the lightning, and the red that the lightning gives to the world is strong and lucky in blood, poppies, roses, rubies, the red feathers of birds, the red carp, the cherry tree, the peony, the line alongside the turtle's eyes and the mallards. In the spring, when the dragon awakes, I watched its turnings in the rivers. The closest I came to seeing a dragon whole was when the old people cut away a small strip of bark on a pine that was over 3,000 years old. The resin underneath flows in the swirling shapes of dragons. If you should decide during your old age that you would like to live another 500 years, come here and drink 10 pounds of this sap, they told me. But don't do it now. You're too young to decide to live forever. The old people sent me out into thunderstorms to pick the red cloud herb, which grows only then, a product of dragon's fire and dragon's rain. I brought the leaves to the old man and old woman, and they ate them for immortality. I learned to make my mind large, as the universe is large, so that there is room for paradoxes. Pearls are bone marrow. Pearls come from oysters. The dragon lives in the sky, ocean, marshes, and mountains the mountains are also its cranium. Its voice thunders and jingles like copper pans. It breathes fire and water, and sometimes the dragon is one, sometimes many. I worked every day. When it rained, I exercised in the downpour, grateful not to be pulling sweet potatoes. I moved like the trees in the wind. I was grateful not to be squishing in chicken mud, which I did not have nightmares about so frequently now. On New Year's mornings, the old man let me look in his water gourd to see my family. They were eating the biggest meal of the year, and I missed them very much. I had felt loved, love pouring from their fingers when the adults tucked red money in our pockets. My two old people did not give me money, but each year for 15 years, a bead. After I unwrapped the red paper and rolled the bead about between thumb and fingers, they took it back for safekeeping. We ate monk's food as usual. By looking into the water gourd, I was able to follow the men I would have to execute. Not knowing that I watched, fat men ate meat. Fat men drank wine made from the rice. Fat men sat on naked little girls. I watched powerful men count their money and starving men count theirs. When bandits brought their share of the raids home, I waited until they took off their masks so I would know the villagers who stole from their neighbors. I studied the generals' faces, their rank stalks quivering at the backs of their heads. I learned rebels' faces too, their foreheads tied with wild oaths. The old man pointed out strengths and weaknesses whenever heroes met in classical battles, but warfare makes a scramble of the beautiful, slow, old fights. I saw one young fighter salute his opponent, and 5 peasants hit him from behind with scythes and hammers. His opponent did not warn him. "Cheaters!" I yelled. "How am I going to win against cheaters?" "Don't worry," the old man said. "You'll never be trapped like that poor amateur. You can see behind you like a bat. Hold the peasant's back with one hand and kill the warrior with the other." Menstrual days did not interrupt my training. I was as strong as on any other day. "You're now an adult," explained the old woman on the first one, which happened halfway through my stay on the mountain. "You can have children." I had thought I had cut myself when jumping over my swords, one made of steel and the other carved out of a single block of jade. "However," she added, "we're asking you to put off children for a few more years." "Then can I use the control you taught me and stop this bleeding?" "No. You don't stop shitting and pissing," she said. "It's the same with the blood. Let it run." Let it walk in Chinese. To console me for being without family on this day, they let me look inside the gourd. My whole family was visiting friends on the other side of the river. Everybody had on good clothes and was exchanging cakes. It was a wedding. My mother was talking to the hosts. "Thank you for taking our daughter. Wherever she is, she must be happy now. She will certainly come back if she is alive. And if she is a spirit, you have given her a descent line. We are so grateful." Yes, I would be happy. How full I would be with all their love for me. I would have for a new husband my own playmate, dear since childhood, who loved me so much he was to become a spirit bridegroom for my sake. We will be so happy when I come back to the valley, healthy and strong, and not a ghost. The water gave me a close-up of my husband's wonderful face, and I was watching when it went white at the sudden approach of armored men on horseback, thudding and jangling. My people grabbed iron skillets, boiling soup, knives, hammers, scissors, whatever weapons came to hand, and my father said, "There are too many of them," and they put down the weapons and waited quietly at the door, open as if for guests. An army of horsemen stopped at our house. The foot soldiers in the distance were coming closer. A horseman with silver scales of fire in the sun shouted from the scroll in his hands, his words opening a red gap in his black beard. "Your baron has pledged 50 men from this district, 1 from each family," he said, and then named the family names. "No!" I screamed into the gourd. "I'll go," my new husband and my youngest brother said to their fathers. "No," my father said, "I myself will go." But the women held him back until the foot soldiers passed by, my husband and my brother leaving with them. As if disturbed by the marching feet, the water churned, and when it stilled again, "Wait!" I yelled, "Wait!" There were strangers. The Baron and his family, all of his family, were knocking their heads on the floor in front of their ancestors and thanking the gods out loud for protecting them from conscription. I watched the Baron's piggish face chew open-mouthed on the sacrificial pig. I plunged my hand into the gourd, making a grab for his thick throat, and he broke into pieces, splashing water all over my face and clothes. I turned the gourd upside down to empty it, but no little people came tumbling out. "Why can't I go down there now and help them?" I cried. "I'll run away with the 2 boys and we'll hide in the caves." "No," the old man said. "You're not ready. You're only 14 years old. You'd get hurt for nothing." "Wait until you're 22, the old woman said. "You'll be big then, and more skillful. No army will be able to stop you from doing whatever you want. If you go now, you will be killed and you'll have wasted 7.5 years of our time. You will deprive your people of a champion. I'm good enough now to save the boys. We didn't work this hard to save just 2 boys, but whole families. Of course. Do you really think I'll be able to do that? Defeat an army? Even when you fight against soldiers trained as you are, most of them will be men, heavy-footed and rough. You will have the advantage. Don't be impatient. From time to time, you may use the water gourd to watch your husband and your brother, the old man said. But I had ended the panic about them already. I could feel a wooden door inside of me close. I had learned on the farm that I could stop loving animals raised for slaughter, and I could start loving them immediately when someone said, "This one is a pet," freeing me and opening the door. We had lost males before, cousins and uncles who were conscripted into armies or bonded as apprentices, who were almost as lowly as slave girls. I bled and thought about the people to be killed. I bled and thought about the people to be born. During all my years on the mountain, I talked to no one except the 2 old people, but they seemed to be many people. The whole world lived inside the gourd, the earth a green and blue pearl like the one the dragon plays with. When I could point at the sky and make a sword appear, a silver bolt in the sunlight, and control its slashing with my mind, the old people said I was ready to leave. The old man opened the gourd for the last time. I saw the Baron's messenger leave our house, and my father was saying, "This time, I must go and fight." I would hurry down the mountain and take his place. The old people gave me the 15 beads, which I was to use if I got into terrible danger. They gave me men's clothes and armor. We bowed to one another. The birds flew above me down the mountain, and for some miles, whenever I turned to look for them, there would be the 2 old people waving. I saw them through the mist. I saw them on the clouds. I saw them big on the mountaintop when distance had shrunk the pines. They had probably left images of themselves for me to wave at and gone about their other business. When I reached my village, my father and mother had grown as old as the 2 whose shapes I could at last no longer see. I helped my parents carry their tools, and they walked ahead so straight, each carrying a basket or a hoe not to overburden me, their tears falling privately. My family surrounded me with so much love that I almost forgot the ones not there. I praised the new infants. "Some of the people are saying the 8 sages took you away to teach you magic," said a little girl cousin. "They say they changed you into a bird and you flew to them." "Some say you went to the city and became a prostitute," another cousin giggled. "You might tell them that I met some teachers who are willing to teach me science," I said. "I have been drafted," my father said. "No, father," I said. "I will take your place."
The Internet and Politics. Jeremy. It is interesting to see the power of the hackers. Hackers in the primary sense of the term, not a criminal. A hacker is a technology enthusiast, somebody who likes to understand how technology works, not to be trapped into technology, but to make it work better. I suppose that when you were 5 or 7, you had a screwdriver and tried to open devices to understand what it was like inside. That is what being a hacker is. And hackers built the internet for many reasons, including because it was fun. And they have developed it and have given the internet to everybody else. Companies like Google and Facebook saw the opportunity to then build business models based on capturing users' personal data. But still, we see a form of power in the hands of hackers. My primary interest these days is that we see these hackers gaining power, even in the political arenas. In the U.S., there has been this SOPA, Stop Online Piracy Act, and PIPA, Protect Intellectual Property Act legislation, violent copyright legislation that basically gives Hollywood the power to order any internet company to restrict access and to censor the internet. Julian, and banking blockades like the one WikiLeaks is suffering from. Jeremy, I think we hackers have a responsibility toward the tools we build and hand out to the rest of the world, and we may be witnessing the beginning of how efficiently this responsibility can be put into action when we use it collectively. Today, in the EU, there is the ACTA debate. ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, is a multinational treaty that is the blueprint for SOPA and PIPA. I just came back from the European Parliament where we as individuals, beardy, smelly individuals, were dictating to one parliamentary committee. We were showing them articles in the rules of procedure in the European Parliament that apparently they were looking at for the first time and told them how to behave. And there was this vote we won by 21-5, which marginalized the British rapporteur in a small corner. This is a very small part of a small procedural point on the way towards defeating ACTA, this monstrous global agreement that has been designed behind our backs to circumvent democracy itself. But we may, as citizens, be able to kill that monster easily with the internet tools, the mailing lists, the wikis, the IRC chat rooms, etc. And I think that we may be witnessing the coming of age, the teenage years of the internet, and the way that it can be used by society at large to try to make things change. I think it is of tremendous importance that we hackers are here with our technical knowledge to guide people and to tell them, you should use this technology that enables control over your privacy rather than Facebook or Google. And that the two articulate together quite well, or may articulate together quite well. This is a small bit of optimism. Julian. Jake, on this political radicalization of internet youth, over the past 2 years especially, you've been all over the world talking about Tor, talking to people who want anonymity, who want privacy in relation to their own government. And you must have seen this phenomenon in many different countries. Is it something significant? Jacob, sure. I think it is absolutely significant. The canonical example that I think of immediately is going to Tunisia. I went to Tunisia after Ben Ali's regime fell, and we talked about Tor in a computer science class, which includes some very technical people at the university, and someone raised her hand and said, "But what about the bad people?" And she rattled off the 4 horsemen of the infopocalypse: money laundering, drugs, terrorism, and child pornography. What about the bad people? Those 4 things are always brought out, and the specter of them is used to shoot down privacy-preserving technologies, because clearly we have to defeat those 4 groups. So I asked the class, who here has ever seen the MR404 page, which is the censorship page deployed by the Ben Ali regime before and during the revolution in order to stop access? Every single person in the room, except the person that asked that question, but including the professor in the class, raised their hand. And I looked at the girl who asked this question and I said, look at all the people around you. That's all your classmates. Do you really believe that it was worth oppressing every person in this room in order to fight against those things? And she said, actually, I'm raising my hand too. It was a little more drawn out than that, but essentially, people who have it contextualized for them realize what the real deal is, and that changes things dramatically. This happens all over the world, all the time, but it usually happens later. That is, people see in hindsight that they could have used the technology. They see in hindsight that, oh yeah, it turns out it's not just bad people, because, in fact, I am the bad person if I speak my mind about something, and a person in power doesn't like what I have to say about it. And you see that there's an awakening. But it's wrong to say that it just happened in the last couple of years. I'm sorry to do this to you, Julian, but you are part of the radicalization of my generation. I'm like a 3rd generation cypherpunk if I were to count it that way. The work that you and Ralph Feynman did on the rubber hose file system was part of what inspired me to work on crypto systems. The crypto file system that I designed, called MAID, was in response to things like the regulatory investigative powers in the United Kingdom, where basically the state has decided negative regulation is the solution to cryptography, where they can take your password. Of course, in Julian's case, when they created this, it was because oppressive regimes would torture people for a passphrase, so you had to be able to give up different passphrases in order to comply with their torture. My crypto file system, MAID, was designed for a legal system where the accused has the right to remain silent, but can prove, if compelled, that they are telling the truth without violating confidentiality. I had realized when I saw Julian's work that you could use technology to empower everyday people to change the world. Going far, far back to the old cypherpunk mailing list with Tim May, one of the founding members of it, and reading Julian's old posts on the cypherpunk lists, that's what started a whole generation of people to really become more radicalized, because people realized that they weren't atomized anymore, that they could take some time to write some software which could empower millions of people. There were just some unintended consequences with how that played out, because the people that created Google didn't start out to create Google, to create the greatest surveillance machine that ever existed. But in fact, that is what has been created. And as soon as people start to realize it, they'll start sending in those national security letters, right? Jeremy, I think there are 3 crucial points in what you just said. Jacob, just 3? Jeremy, among others. Andy, okay, let me add number 4 maybe, yeah? Jacob, you don't even know what they are yet. Jeremy, I see 3 points that are intertwined. I'm not saying they should be taken separately, but one of them is authoritarian regimes and the powers that authoritarian regimes have in an era of digital technologies. In the case of the Ben Ali regime, it is obvious in so many regimes today, you can decide what people can learn about or who they can communicate with. This is of tremendous power, and this should be opposed, and the internet, a free internet, is a tool for opposing that.
So from these eggheads, the Pythagoreans, with their mathematical formula, came the basis.
Essi lavorano insieme seguendo un piano coordinato di ricerche e avvalendosi di un'attrezzatura che nessuna nazione da sola sarebbe in grado di fornire. I risultati di queste ricerche saranno messi a disposizione di tutti. Per esempio, gli isotopi radioattivi prodotti in Inghilterra, negli Stati Uniti, in Canada e altrove vengono usati oggi in tutto il mondo, negli ospedali, nell'industria, in agricoltura, nei luoghi più disparati come la Finlandia o la Nuova Zelanda. Lo sviluppo degli impianti di energia atomica sta diventando realtà in un numero sempre maggiore di paesi. Le consegne di isotopi aumentano di giorno in giorno. Solo da Oak Ridge negli Stati Uniti, per esempio, le spedizioni di isotope sono saltate da 1900 nel 1947 a più di 11.000 nel 1953. L'era atomica ha solo 12 anni di età e noi siamo soltanto all'inizio. Siamo appena alla soglia dei benefici che ci verranno dall'opera di centinaia di migliaia tra scienziati.
Now that wasn't a nice thing to say, I.S. When you say things that aren't nice, you hear things back that aren't nice. Is this machine recording? Is this machine recording? Is this machine recording?
Setenta grados.
El Hoodlums put on handkerchief masks, arm themselves. Soplando ahora del oeste a razón de 6 millas por hora. Repetimos, la temperatura actual 74 grados. Most of his criticism for Red China rather than North Vietnam. Johnson, addressing a meeting of editorial cartoonists at the White House, held 3 maids at gunpoint and proceeded to ransack the apartment. Their take, one piece is established. He offered to support an Asian Development Bank to help finance economic progress. And the president added, on trial for perjury, for allegedly lying to a grand jury about the Duncan parking meter of Union and helping in jewelry. This late word, the House Education and Labor, the officials in Washington